Hello and welcome along to CBS Sports HQ presented by Zelle. I'm Poppy Miller. We've got another action-packed weekend coming up in the NWSL, and here's a look at the 5 matches that we've got on tap.
Postseason positioning is on the line as the NWSL regular season heads into another jam-packed weekend of important matchups. And the action kicks off Saturday night as New Jersey New York Gotham FC hosts the North Carolina Courage. The Washington Spirit will try to get back in the win column, but they have a tough task on their hands as they take on the dominant first-place Portland Thorns.
The deflection, Everett.
And the final game on Saturday takes place in Tacoma as the OL Reign hosts the Houston Dash, with OL Reign forward Eugenie Lasomere providing quite possibly the goal of the NWSL season last week.
Two chops, Lasomere, what a spectacular goal! Her first for OL Reign.
On Sunday, Racing Louisville FC takes on Kansas City, with both clubs looking for 3 points. The final match of the weekend goes down in the Windy City as the Chicago Red Stars continue to round into form.
Racing forward, pew!
The Red Stars would take on the Orlando Pride, who have some scoring firepower of their own.
Look at Krieger pushing forward, Ratcliffe harassing her. Krieger for LaRue! It's an opening goal for Orlando!
Who will shine in an action-packed weekend in the NWSL? Tune into Paramount Plus to find out.
So a pivotal weekend awaits in the NWSL, and here to preview the upcoming matches, former US international and 2-time Olympic gold medalist Aly Wagner joins us now. Aly, let's start with the league leaders, the Portland Thorns, taking on the Spirit. I mean, we've seen many teams struggle over this Olympic stretch, but the Thorns, they have just thrived. They're unbeaten in 9 and have only conceded 1 goal during that time. Are you expecting more dominance from them this weekend?
You know, I'm actually thinking that Washington might be able to pick up a win here and juxtapose that with Washington that has been, I would say, a bit inconsistent. They've got a younger team, so they're coming off of a lost win, where they've been oscillating between those two positions in terms of their results. But I think that potentially them hosting, being on turf, Portland having to travel across the country, you know, could provide some problems for this Portland side, especially because Washington dominates the game in possession. They want to get that big expansive shape. And if Portland doesn't have an efficient press to understand when to go, how to go as a unit, I think Washington will dominate proceedings, and they can really cause problems at back line. Trinity Rodman is a player that I think can be the difference in this match. She had a brilliant goal last week against Chicago. You're getting a good look at it there. She's just a handful. This is one of the most active players on the roster. She leads the team in terms of dribbles, in terms of creation, fouls suffered. I mean, this player is all over the pitch for Washington, just a young 19-year-old. And Poppy, we talk about players to watch in terms of this transition for the U.S. women's national team. Well, Trinity Rodman is one, and there's a whole host of them on the pitch in this matchup between Portland and Washington. You got Ashley Sanchez, and for Portland, you've got Sophia Smith and potentially others, Andy Sullivan for Washington Spirit. I just think this matchup is the game of the week for me, and I do think that Washington is going to have enough to overpower this Portland side, as consistent as they have been, and I think Washington will look to try to steer play outside. So ultimately, I think that I'm going to give Washington the go-ahead 2-1.
So the game of the week there for you, but elsewhere we've got another blockbuster matchup on Saturday when Gotham FC hosts the Courage. This is 2 teams trending in opposite directions. North Carolina, the winless in their last 4, Gotham unbeaten in their last 7. How do you see this one unfolding, Aly?
Yeah, I think this could be a draw. I really do. I think there's a couple things to consider here. Gotham is, when we saw these 2 teams play in the Challenge Cup, Gotham was a handful for North Carolina. Scoreline was 4-3. The game was incredibly open, but Gotham in this matchup is not going to have Midge Purse. She was a player that was instrumental in that victory. And they are going to have, however, Ifeoma Onumonu, and she's a handful. What we've seen from teams that are getting at North Carolina is that they open up the pitch and they are good in transition. Ifeoma can take advantage of those situations. And on the flip side, Jess McDonald is going to be back in the flow for North Carolina. She's recovered from COVID, and this is going to be the first time we're going to see her partnered up top with Amy Rodriguez, the recent pickup for North Carolina. Another player that is starting to settle in for Paul Riley and understand the demands that he asks of his players in terms of the press, in terms of the fitness and the work rate. I think she looked really bright. She created the assist on the goal in the last match that they had, the tying goal. So I want to see those two start to find some chemistry together. I think it's going to be an interesting match, but ultimately I think they're going to wash each other out in midfield, where this game is ultimately going to be won or lost, and I think it's going to be a draw.
So expecting a draw there. A win for the Courage, though, would put them ahead of second place Gotham FC in the standings, which just shows how tight it is in the table at the minute. And only 1 point separates our next match, which is OL Reign taking on the Dash, who we meet in Tacoma. I mean, the Reign riding a 2-game win streak coming into this one. Do you see them keeping this momentum going against the Dash, Aly?
I do. And I think that with this OL Reign team, what they were suffering from before was just that lack of finishing touch. They were creating chances. They weren't finding the back of the net. That's all changed. They've scored 7 goals in their last 4. And I think you have to credit the interim manager, Sam. He's a manager that understands the league. He's been around. He knows the players. He knows how to win games. And those are the words of Sofia Huerta when I reached out to her. He's set up this team differently, where he's got Eugenie Losamer put in that number 9 spot. And you can just see that she puts defenders on skates. She's an incredibly special talent, and she's starting to settle in, along with Maro Sean, who's playing in a double pivot role alongside Danny Weatherholt. So their internationals are starting to understand the pace and demands of the NWSL. And I think that with her at that number 9 spot, Jess Fishlock underneath, I think they look really dangerous going forward. Huerta's been bright on that right side. And I think that they are going to continue this momentum. The question really is going to be, can they actually manage the game defensively? Because they've looked a bit open and porous in certain moments. I don't think Huerta wants to defend on that right-hand side. So if the Dash are to pick one off here, and we know how Dash want to play, they want to keep things tight defensively and look to take advantage of moments where they can break. Jazz Spencer going up against Huerta and Hammond on that right side for OL Reign. I think her and Groom can cause some problems. So I do think that Dash is going to be able to find the back of the net, but I'm still looking at this OL Reign side for being able to continue their momentum and score goals. Eugenie Losamer coming off that brace last week.
And it seems the Dash have just fallen short so many times this season. 12 of their last 13 games have been separated by just 1 goal or less. Well, speaking of struggles, the bottom 2 teams in the league will also go head-to-head this weekend, racing Louisville hosting Kansas City, who are still looking for their first win of the season. They've come close in several matches, Aly, but how mentally defeating is it for these players at this point of the season?
It's heartbreaking. I mean, it's frustrating. It is something that can wear on you, and you don't feel motivated to get out and play on the weekend. But I think they're reinvigorated by some of the acquisitions they picked up. Haley Mace coming over from North Carolina alongside Kristen Hamilton. And it's changed the dynamic of the front line for this group. Darian Jenkins on the right side looked brighter last week as a result. They're pressing, their counter press. It's just so much more active. Before this Kansas City team was a toothless team in attack. They look incredibly different now. And I think they are going to provide some problems moving forward, especially for this racing Louisville. So I look at them as a team that can pick up their first win against Louisville. Both teams in desperate situations right now. Louisville has not scored in their last 2 matches. And Kansas City on the flip side has not scored in their last 3. So you're looking at both these sides wanting to provide goals. I think that Kansas City has the nod because of these acquisitions, and they're going up against a young back line in Louisville that just hasn't been consistent and have given away some cheap moments to the opposition, and I think Kansas City is going to be able to capitalize.
And you mentioned the close matches they've already had. They drew with Gotham, they drew with the Courage, they only lost 1-0 to the Thorns. They just seem to not be able to get that win, but maybe this weekend is their weekend. And to conclude...
Yeah. And Poppy, to add to that, they're actually one of the teams that they're not performing compared to their expected points. They actually should have a lot higher expected points total based on the way they're playing. They're underperforming. I think that's going to shift now with some of this momentum shift with the acquisitions.
So Aly back in Kansas City this weekend. Well, to conclude the action this weekend, the Pride will take on the Red Stars. And despite a strong start to the season for the Pride, they've really missed their international stars. They're winless now in their last 7 games, and they have relied so heavily on goalkeeper Ashlyn Harris. How do you see them faring against the Red Stars, who really seem to have found their form as of late?
Yeah, I think this could be another draw. I do. I think Chicago looks great. Chicago, initially similar to OL Reign, we're having difficulty finding the back of the net, but they've been on a goal scoring tear in their last 10 goals. Actually, 5 of them have been own goals by the opposition. So that is their leading goal scorer at this time. But I think Mallory Pugh is a player that Chicago has to lean on and has to rely on. This is like we talk about with Portland and Washington Spirit having young talents. Mallory Pugh is another young talent, another potential U.S. Women's National Team star that could come into the fold. And she's been bright. She's been their chance creator along with Kalia Watt. And I really like the matchup for Chicago in this game with Pugh on that right-hand side going up against that left of Orlando. But I ultimately think that Orlando with Sydney Leroux, she's been able to capitalize on the chances that they've had. I think her going against the center back partnership of Gordon and her partner there, they will be able to cause problems. They're a direct team, as we know. And with Chicago, sometimes they gamble too much forward and they leave themselves open in the transition. So I think this game is going to be a draw, and I think it breaks a little bit of that momentum that Chicago has generated in the last 4 of their 5 matches.
Well, they have silently been making their way up the standings, but only 3 points separates 2nd and 7th place. So it's all to play for yet again this weekend. And Aly Wagner with a fantastic insight, as always, with what we can expect. Aly, thanks so much.
Thanks, Poppy.
And here is a reminder of the matches we've got on tap. It all gets started at 7 p.m. Eastern Saturday night when the high-flying Gotham FC welcome the struggling Courage to Red Bull Arena. The league leaders, the Portland Thorns, will look to add more distance between themselves and the rest of the pack against the Red Stars. The Dash will travel to Tacoma to take on the Reign. And 2 matches for Sunday, a meeting at the bottom 2 in the league, racing Louisville hosting Kansas City. And to conclude the action, the Pride on the road to take on the Red Stars in Chicago at Toyota Park.